I used to dread this question when somebody would ask me, "Can you tell us something about yourself?" I felt like I could never really say or explain in a few lines who I am, and that's probably why I ended up studying this as in my career, just trying to understand who I am and who we are as a society. But to answer your question, I am many things. I am a political sociologist in career, by training. I'm also a storyteller. I'm also a poet. I love creative writing. I love art. I'm also a woman who loves to listen to people. I love life. And to me, loving life means understanding people, understanding societies around us. And so I don't think I can ever separate my professional self from my personal self. And I think there's this, I think, uh, fake or unreal concept that we are at any point, any of us, able to separate our personal selves from our professional selves, because who we are motivates what we do, and therefore I don't think we can ever separate our personal selves from our professional selves. And I never claimed to do that. And so part of what I want to do through this project or through this podcast is to kind of look at these binaries or these separate categories of professional versus personal, how the world perceives us as who we are. I think there is a lot of gray zones in between. I think there's a lot that doesn't fit into the categories, and that's what I want to talk about. Um, and I think you'll probably see more of me as this podcast progress, because I think there are so many layers to me, as it is to so many of us. And through this podcast, through every conversation that I will have, all the stories that I will explore, all the questions that I'll ask, you'll be able to see more of me, I think, and certainly of all the people that I'll be talking to. The concept of Outlier as a podcast, it was an inspiration that came from a frustration, basically. You know, uh, it was inspired by my research, but it was also inspired by how I see life and everybody around me. Like I said, I'm a storyteller. Even as a researcher, as an academic, I'm a storyteller. You find that across my research, across the work that I write, whatever I do, even when I talk to people, whether it's for writing a research or anything else, I believe in talking to people and listening to their stories in their language. And so Outlier, you know, as a basic concept, is basically something that's, outside the norm or the exception. Like when you look at graphs, there's that outlier that's outside the predicted norm. And that basically, in human lives, this could mean people or things that are out of the ordinary. So something that's different. And while people might see that as a disadvantage, to me that's an advantage, and it's a framework of looking at our lives, or looking at our journeys beyond what we're used to. So not just looking at success stories or people that made it in their life because of whatever factors. I want to focus on the outlier, the difference, the challenge that you used and turned it into an opportunity, and what made you different. It's kind of going against the grain and saying that everybody has a success story, everybody is successful in their own way. And success is not about, you know, filling in a certain framework. You could be successful in your own way. And this is where the concept of outlier came. Um, I want to be able to talk to people, different stories, things that you wouldn't really see on media, or that you wouldn't see in your typical narratives. Through outlier as a concept, I want to combine my research with real life stories, but just beyond that, talk to people and listen to their stories in unconventional ways, in ways that they want to talk about it. The outlier is for everyone. It's for everybody who, wants to have a conversation, who I want to speak to. We want to make it as human as possible. We want to make it as approachable, as accessible as possible. There will be, I can't tell you everybody who I'll be talking to because I want to keep an element of anticipation and surprise and excitement. I have, I know really great people. I think I'm blessed to know so many great people around me, who inspire me in so many ways. And they've inspired me certainly so much. And I learn from them every single day. And I want to be able to have those conversations and share them with you. So I can just tell you that the conversations that we have lined up for you are just very diverse, very human, very enriching, very deep, very thoughtful, very fun. There will be people across all spectrums. So there isn't a specific genre that we're exploring. We're looking at people across all fields of life. Professionals, some would be researchers, some would be students, some would be just people who just are going through a challenge in their life, but they were able to make it on their own terms. It will be everything that's unconventional. So it will not be your typical podcast where you come and expect people to give you a particular storyline. It will be everything that is raw and human, and that is will be a beautiful story. The audience is really international. I don't believe in like limiting things to a particular set of audiences. I want to be as open as possible to multiple audiences. But what I want to focus in terms of my audience, sorry, in terms of my guests, would be local and regional guests, because I think there's this um, ever long gap between how the world outside or the West understands this part of the world, whether through literature, through research, through media, through different narratives, even through news or politics. But I want to focus on the unexplored aspects of our region for the regional audiences themselves, but also for the people outside. So the podcasts will be very accessible to everyone. So we'll put it out there, whoever wants to listen. But my personal hope is that the regional audiences would engage with it. Uh, not only because this is my region, but it's also the people that I interact with on a daily basis, people that inspire me, people whose stories are often subject to, uh, you know, these really fancy headlines or these really inaccurate representations of their lives, or these very flashy kind of statements that make it to social media, and to news, or to, I don't know, popular culture. So I want this to be a platform where we can actually see, the real diverse and rich um, aspect of our societies in the region. And so I think the focus remains the region, but it remains open to the rest of the world. And who knows, we might change and develop in the future. Ooh, I think I'm gonna get emotional. um, I think, so I have to be honest. Like, if I think back in my life, like growing up, um, I didn't know then, but I certainly did feel like an outlier. Now I think I have the linguistics for understanding what an outlier is. I think there was this light bulb moment that went on in my mind. There's this one day I was studying for my PhD and looking at these different graphs, just trying to understand this concept. And there kept coming this outlier that I just couldn't resolve or like understand what it meant. And I went on this extensive research, and then I understood that this outlier is going to be my most important contribution to my work. And I think that was the light bulb moment that went on in my mind, where I was like, "Oh my God, maybe that's how I felt growing up." Um, I think growing up, especially for me, I did feel very different, and I again, I don't want to look make it look like an exception or something negative or a sorry story, but this is my story, and I think growing up, I felt certainly very different. I was raised in a very multicultural environment, starting from my home to my school, to my surroundings. Here in Doha, I went to international schools, and they were as diverse as you could think about. But there were certainly moments where I felt very different. I didn't feel like I fit into a category or fit into a group. um, I always found myself being like my own clique. There were times I felt kind of isolated, but on purpose. I was a child that had big imagination, and our generation, the millennials generation, I think was the last generation to be able to imagine, because there were times where we'd be so bored, like we didn't have social media, you would be just so bored and you would go and just think about all these things. And I was that child who'd love to like imagine and think, and that was my safe space. I didn't fit into this category, not in this group. Multicultural, I don't fit into one culture. I don't fit into one ethnicity. Not similar interests to many people around me. So I would just think. I would sit there and think and make up scenarios. This is where I started writing. I found a lot of peace and a lot of excitement in writing. And that didn't make a lot of sense to people around me. You're talking about a girl who was around 10 years old. So a lot of people around me didn't understand why I was writing or why I loved reading. Um, so I certainly felt very odd. I was exposed to many different languages, different cultures. That was really a part of who I was. And I think that was very difficult to handle as a young girl, because we were used to living in a society where everybody kind of knew their space and their category, but I didn't. Um, it was a very difficult place to navigate, but I think that outlier that I felt of myself at that time made me who I am. And I think that a lot of the credit goes to my own family, specifically my parents, who I think never really they never really tried to see put me into a category. They never it was never made I was never made to feel, in other words, at least in the home environment, to pick a side, or I had to pick a category. The difference was uh, and I wouldn't say accommodated, but it was very much understood, and at one point celebrated. And so I think I certainly felt like an outlier, but I very much enjoyed it. I very much enjoyed doing my own thing. And then I think as I grew up and went into my higher education, I found more people who were quite like me, but I also understood the value of not just isolating myself, but integrating more. And I understood that everybody at one point has felt like an outlier in some way. Um, so yeah, that's the long story short. And to know more, I think you'll have to follow more. First of all, I have to confess that my public appearance on social media was not intentional, at least in the beginning. I think it all started to happen when I was a PhD student, and I always say that the PhD students often feel like they're going to change the world. I don't know if that really happens, but that's this. I think it's part of the journey where you really are convinced in your mission. So I think I started just writing on social media because I needed an outlet beyond the academic, the very professional kind of environment. So I just started writing on social media, thinking at that point that it was a way to just to engage. And then I think it just evolved into something more professional, where I had to keep a very professional persona, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think who I am as a person beyond social media is is very different, but it's also not very different, because I never have ever tried to be pretentious on social media. What I have done on social media is that I understand the mission of social media. I don't believe in sharing all parts of me on social media, because again, I'm from the generation, the last generation to see life before um, internet, and so I very much value that. I value privacy. I value my own personal space. I know people think I'm an extrovert, but I'm actually an introvert. I don't like sharing too much of my personal self and personal life. Um, so everything you see on social media uh, is the same person, but it's a very, I would say, scratching the surface to who I am. I think as a woman in real life, there's much more that I like to do. I like to have a lot more fun. That's for sure. I love art. If that's not obvious on social media, I'm a woman who loves to experience different aspects of life, and I don't like to be very formal. Um, I don't know if that's very obvious, but even in my professional appearances, I always like to show a little bit of my personality. I don't believe in, like I said, in this two separate personas of professional versus personal. In summary, I think in real life I'm much more fun and much more not informal. Why do you guys keep asking me these really deep questions, these very emotional questions? Um, I think there isn't one moment. I think there are several moments that changed my life. Um, and it's because I think our life is a journey. I look at it as one long film. And then there are these moments of impact that I think are turning points in our lives, because we're always growing. But I think there are several turning points in our life where we go from one stage to another, or where we have these reckonings in ourselves that help us become the next version of ourselves. Um, I had several of those moments. I think uh, two of those moments are really important moments, amongst many others. I think uh, one of them was when I was a student in the UK. Um, for my postgraduate studies, I was studying at SOAS, School of Oriental African Studies, and it was my first time living away from my family for a long period of time. And um, I think I went when I went to do my master's. Um, I didn't understand my purpose in life that much, and I wasn't seeking purpose. I mean, at least in my part of um, the world, we're not raised with this like this concept that I have to find my purpose in life. It was not never like that. But I think when I was sitting in the UK around 2014, I think um, it was this lecture that I was sitting in, this big philosopher who was talking about how the societies around us are built and what we can do with this world. I think it was just a light bulb moment that went into my head. And without realizing, I understood what I should be doing and what my gift was in life. Um, and I think that was a transformational moment in my life. Uh, and the other turning point in my life was um, it was my grandmother when she passed away, and she was a very she was a very kind person, but she's a very empathetic person. She always, I always saw her as somebody who's always speaking her mind and her heart, and is very overgiving. And I never thought that was um, something I aspire to do, because I would think to myself, like, why would I be giving to everyone, and why should I be understanding to everyone? In other words, I thought I need to be more strategic in my life, but when she passed away, and unfortunately, I wasn't with her when that happened. But I think um, her death made me realize the power of giving and the gift of giving without expecting anything in return, um, because that's who you are. And I think giving is our legacy. Whatever we give in life, that is our legacy. And I think that was a really impactful moment in my life. And I wish I would be able to actually go back and learn more from her, because there's so many people that we can learn from in ways we never really thought.